Switching over, turn up my mic, turning you up, and let's go into this. Just realized I'm not on screen right now, but that's okay. So, guys, getting a little bit of a late start here. If you're listening, let me get my chat started, and we've got Billy here tonight as well. So we're gonna go through some of his work and just kind of a
Just gonna hang out.
kind of hang out, yeah, because it's Fourth of July week, and we were just talking a little bit off air, and things are a little bit crazy this week. So
hmm
as you can see, I'm getting like a 5 minute late start, and I'm usually like 15 minutes early. All right, I don't need that. I can move this over here. All right, Kira's up and running.
Are you on the Brograph YouTube
I am on.
or is it your YouTube?
It's Restream has its own little chat mechanism. I can actually send it to you because there's a little
I just
window.
want to know who to tag as far as the. I'm gonna do an Instagram live
Oh, I am
or not
on.
live, an Instagram story. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm on all of them, so you can do
Okay.
Brograph or mine, doesn't really matter. And then I just sent you a link.
Word.
If you use that link, it will give you the chat for all the channels. Um, so you can see it the same way that I do from YouTube, mine, YouTube, Brograph, Facebook, wherever.
Word. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think. Did I send the right one? Hold on. Nope, that is not the right link. I don't think. No, that didn't give it to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
I will send it again. There we go. Cool. All right, guys. So before we get started with Billy's work and all that, I'm sorry my face isn't up. I have my camera launched. It's just not showing for some reason. Whatever. You'll see both of us in a second. I'm just going to go through some new post effect stuff if you guys have missed that, because that's been a big thing, and uh, it's been a long time coming. I feel like I've heard about them talking about it for about a year. So now they're finally starting to roll it out and doing a beta test. So if you haven't switched over to Redshift for whatever reason, because you like Octane's post effects, you're now going to be able to get that inside Redshift. So I'm just going to scroll through some of the images that people have been posting on the forums. If you follow Merc anywhere, he's been doing a lot of like extreme tests of just how far can you push lens flares and things like that. But there's a lot of really nice subtle effects that people have been doing too, and um, it seems to work just like you would expect if you're an Octane user. I particularly like this one here with this kind of engine block thing. I just realized at the bottom my text is not updated for today. Man, I am just all sloppy.
It's all good, man.
July 5th. We'll update that right now.
The post effects has been something that I've been waiting for. I know I'll just speak for myself in saying that I was an Octane user
Mm-hmm.
up until about, man, it's going over a year now. But I
Yeah.
used Octane for a solid 2, 3 years, and as cheesy as the post effects are, it's pretty handy.
Yeah.
There's kind of two schools of thought. There's like the I'm gonna do everything in post and like have 1,000 mats and 1,000 layers, and then there's the complete opposite, which is like give me a beauty pass and you know call it a day. So for
Right.
that second camp, I think the post effect stuff is huge.
Yeah, totally. And I know when I switched over, it was a huge deal. Um, like I kind of was disappointed at first because I didn't know that they didn't have any post effects. But now I kind of don't really care. I've gotten used to it, and now that they're adding it, it's like, oh, what a nice little surprise. So um, I'm kind of glad to see it. But if you guys are able to see this, you can see there's everything all inside the IPR now and the render view window, so you don't even have to re-render anything. It's going to be right in there as you're working. It is still post effect, so it'll do its progressive pass or its bucket render and then apply this afterwards. But you get exposure and contrast and bloom, and I think even there's like Reinhard effects too. I don't see it in here, but I know Chad Ashley was talking to me about it a little bit. Lens flares built into it, how big the streaks are. So a lot of really nice details. Um, Here's some down here that people have done too, just talking about where's the light radiating from, so you can control that. Let's see if there's any other really nice ones this far back. Oh yeah, people doing some shots with kind of like God rays, but more light streak God rays. And I think this is another like Mark's crazy stuff down there. Anything else? I haven't got. There's more pages than there were the last time I looked, so this is kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm excited for it to see wide release. I'm a little
Yeah,
bummed that I didn't get into the alpha or whatever the pre-beta for the post effect stuff.
yeah,
I legitimately have a couple car renders that I'm sitting on
mm-hmm.
and waiting for the post effects build to come out so that I
Yeah,
can just toy with those and like not worry about like reposting them.
mm-hmm.
So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. I purposely didn't apply to it just because I didn't think I would get in. Um, but then I saw how little people applied. Like I went to the forum and there was only like between 10 and 20 that applied. I was like, oh, I probably could have gotten in. Um, but
Tokyo says turn up your mic. I don't know
mine?
about my mic. I don't know. I just see in the restream.
Hmm. Why didn't he show up in my restream? That's weird. Interesting. Um, whose mic? Mine or yours?
I actually just tuned into the stream for a little bit and he says only your mic. He says my mic's good.
Okay. I will turn mine up even more. Let me see. I
Oh, just a smidge, I think.
uh, well, I'm looking at it now and I'm hitting yellow now, so that should help.
Word.
Or I could just talk louder. So, so I think tonight, now that I've gone through the post effects, we're going to take a look at some of Billy's work. The last time you were on, you had just finished up. Let
I
me
had done
scroll
the
back.
turbofan wheel, which was like
Yeah,
the white wheel that had like a flat white front.
yeah. So, yeah, the like the Porsche wheel, right?
Yeah, it says Porsche.
Yeah. Um, so everything else is pretty new. Like you've got your shoe render that came out that I know a lot of people talked about. Your Gundam stuff. So whatever you want to pick and choose from, I had suggested that Billy goes over how he did his Gundam work, just because the like flares that come out the back and the flames and propulsion. I'm interested in that personally, just because you didn't use X particles for that, right? Like that's like geometry.
Um, Correct. That is an in-render effect. It's
Yeah.
essentially a mesh light.
Okay.
But I can break that down.
Cool.
So earlier today, I posted on my Instagram story asking if there's anything anyone particularly wanted to see, and a follower of mine, Andres, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he asked for one specific thing about the motion blur on the driving GTR tunnel scene I had.
Okay.
So I guess I should pull up oh boy, screen share, present now. Oh boy, this is not Hangouts.
Yeah, they changed
Oh
it to
God, where are we?
Meet. Yeah, it's now Meet instead of Hangouts. I don't understand.
Google, you do this every year. Okay, all right, I found it. Present my entire screen, my left screen, share.
There we go. It's coming up.
Okay, cool. It says things.
There we
So we're
go.
gonna turn that on. Quiet hours. I'm presenting to everyone. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So for the viewer who asked me, how does car run? No, he asked it in very nicely. So we're gonna find this car, and here it is. Okay, so the car rig that I use is if you just Google search Cinema 4D car rig, um, there is I'm not gonna even attempt to pronounce the name, but it is a very awesome and kind Chinese fellow on Vimeo, and he posted this car rig.
Okay.
So pretty much what I did for the rig of this car is so there was a folder that had basically just the body, the chassis of the car. So that is this. If we solo this, so this is just the chassis. And then in my wheel geometry null, we have my 4 wheels and then the suspension setup. So this suspension stuff is set to not render. Um, just I don't know what I can and can't delete out of this rig because a lot of the
Yeah.
rig is written in Chinese text, and there is a whole lot of constraints and other stuff.
Yeah.
But basically, I just picked my way through this file, and I found where I needed to set the things that needed to rotate. So we'll see, for example, here are just the brakes. Let me actually find the front left. All right, front left. So here, example would only be the brakes. For that, the brake caliper. And if you're familiar with how a car wheel works, the caliper does not move. So
Mm.
that's in a separate group. And then there's the rotating group. In this case, I'm using proper use of instances within Cinema because Redshift doesn't have the instance of an instance limitation that
That, yeah.
that Octane has.
Yep.
Yeah. So even though I am using instances, this viewport is pretty shot. In this, and I just went to move, and I think it crashed. I've got the Windows equivalent of the beach ball.
Yeah.
Um,
That's all right.
I clicked my play button. So yeah, that's a little bit disappointing. So we are we're going to force quit that.
Cool.
But yeah, there's really not a whole lot to it. If you're familiar with motion blur inside of Redshift itself, which I know Liam, you have done
Mm.
a video on motion blur, I believe.
I don't know that I ever
Have you?
actually like tackled motion blur specifically. I know people have asked me on the live stream because they always get confused when it's not working in the render view or IPR. But
Gotcha. All right.
yeah,
Well, we're gonna open that file up one more time, and then okay, now that we're back up and going, we will present. Okay. So we're gonna go find that project file, and then we'll jump back in. So there's really not a whole lot going on in terms of the rig.
mm,
Like I said, I poked my way through that project file that forgetting the name right now, but he posted up, and I'll just show the motion blur settings in Redshift. So there's not a whole lot to it. The transformation steps, it's kind of like the motion blur equivalent of substeps.
mm,
Basically, how many interstitial frames will Redshift calculate to, decide how blurry a basically how blurred each spoke winds up being.
yeah,
I settled on 5. I pretty much, um, I would run just region renders in bucket mode to
mm,
the picture viewer, and I basically, I would try just this value on 1, just this value on point 1, and then hit render, and then
yeah,
double them, hit render, double them again, hit render, and just kind of work my way through the settings,
mm,
from the low side of the spectrum all the way up to the high side of the spectrum, and I would just find which one I liked most. I do that with a lot of effects, I think. If it's like depth of field or when you're testing out a shader, like how much displacement do you want or, whatever.
yeah,
I'll render out like a handful of them in the picture viewer. I'll like name like each one like, oh, this setting was like 5 by zero point 0.4 by whatever, and then the next one I'll do, oh, this was 6 by zero point 0.5 by whatever, and then I'll just kind of you know work my way up and down kind of in the picture viewer and just come to a happy medium. So um, that's a pretty simple thing. One thing you do want to pay attention to with the motion blur is I believe see at 1,
okay,
and I'm going to do a much poor or less good explanation of what the documentation does because it has photographic proof. But basically, shutter efficiency at 1 means that the virtual shutter of the camera, opening
Mm-hmm.
and closing, is like perfectly efficient. Now that basically means it's instantly open and instantly closed,
Yeah.
which is not how a camera's aperture works. Those things take time to open and close. So I would recommend starting your shutter efficiency down all the way to 0 and then working your way back up, because it will introduce a slightly more amount of motion blur um, at 0 versus at 1. And
Okay.
for this render, I wound up at a 0.2. Just, again, rendering, oh, what does 0 look like? What does 0.5 look like? What does 1 look like? And then just basically whittling your way towards what you're looking for artistically.
So,
Um,
so I have a question for you because I've never really used it or looked it up. What's deformation blur? Like, I don't know why I would ever use that.
oh, so deformation blur is if you have something like a bend deformer or some sort of deformer that
Mm-hmm.
is that is moving the vertices of a mesh, and that movement requires deformation blur,
Gotcha.
because without deformation blur, or with deformation blur unchecked, you're only getting PSR data.
Okay.
And if you have a mesh actually deforming, like for the example of like a character,
Mm-hmm.
if that character's like arm is moving, or if his hand is moving, I'm gesturing in front of my webcam here and realizing that it's not being seen. But if you're, if you were like opening and closing a hand on a character, for example, and you wanted motion blur um, reliant on that, you would need to use deformation motion blur.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah,
Um,
I don't ever do character animation, so and I don't think I do many deformers moving around in my scenes, so that makes sense of why I've never turned it on.
yeah, so of I've got a handful of work in progress renders to kind of explain what the shutter efficiency and the substeps winds up looking like. So this render that we're looking at right here, we can see this is a 6-spoke rim, and we can see that these spokes are relatively defined still. Like
Okay.
visually, we can separate them.
Yeah.
Whereas, at least I believe, kind of looking at some footage and being a little bit familiar with this particular topic, um, I decided that I wanted more motion blur than
Mm-hmm.
that. And so we wound up somewhere closer to this, where the spokes are much less defined, kind of one by one. And then that's a different scene. Yeah, so somewhere kind of around this ballpark is where we wound up with a fairly substantial amount more motion blur. Um, and the way that the last thing I'll show on this is this car, as far as the rig is concerned, is here it is. So the whole null that the car is within, it's just moving in a straight line on the z-axis.
Mm-hmm.
And if we drag this, we'll see that I'm going to go slow just in case the frame rate of the screen capture doesn't really see it well.
Yeah, it's picking it
But
up.
as we're dragging this, we're seeing that the wheels are turning automatically. And they're turning correct in terms of, at least I think they're turning correct in terms of the circumference of the wheel, in regards
Mm-hmm.
to how much surface area it's covering. So it's not like you're moving the thing and then also just rotating the wheel, and you just so happen to get those two values to look right in
Right.
tandem.
Yeah.
I believe it's actually going about it intelligently. And also in this rig, you have steering controls.
Cool.
And then just as one extra layer of control, you do have, it's called friction simulation in here, but like if you want the tires to be turning a little bit extra, like say maybe it's doing like a burnout or something, like it's doing some sick drifting, you can have the rear or whatever wheels you want turn a bit. And then the last thing is this has a terrain module. This is a relatively flat piece of road here. It does have a very small amount of bumpiness to it,
Mm-hmm.
that I did kind of model in with like a shader deformer. But if this was like a mountainous scene, you would see the car like tumbling and like rock crawling over the stuff. So um, again, I apologize that the screen share is not going to do too great of a job picking it up. But if you do watch this, uh, if you watch the loop of this on my Instagram, you will see the tires and stuff kind of reacting a little bit um, to the pavement. The car will kind of squat and dip
Cool.
and turn and kind of react, and it just crashed again. So I think that's a good point to move on, and I will get the Gundam scene pulled up
Cool.
if you want
You,
to just buy some time.
yeah, I was gonna say. So you just found that scene like readily available online,
The scene, do you mean
or the car? Sorry, just the car, like the rig and everything.
the rig? Yes, the rig I found, but it is a completely different car.
Oh, okay.
It is not that car. It's like I think it's actually a dollar like a Dodge Challenger or something. It's like, but it has hilariously oversized like Jeep wheels and
Mm-hmm.
like fat like mountain climbing tires. So it's kind of weird, but you'll know it if you see it based off that description.
Okay.
If you Google like C4D car rig or what like free car rig or whatever.
Cool.
Um, it's not a plugin; it's a scene file that I basically picked my way through and placed my stuff, which I've been modeling and um, the body of that car I've been retopologizing and then adding the additional stuff like the splitter, the canards, the wing. These
Right.
are all fancy car terms, but I've been adding extra stuff onto that file. Um, so let's pull up the Gundam and I always have a hard time finding that file because I started it as a daily. So it's in my dailies drive. So, okay. All right. I found it easier than I thought I would.
Let's see. A couple people in chat. I just gonna say hi to. So it's Vitus. That's awesome. You're usually on. Tokyo's here, and then Cristobal just showed up. What's up, Cristobal? Oh,
All right.
Nick's in the chat. Nick's Carcella.
Oh, hey,
Uh,
dude.
he said he used the same car rig on a job a few weeks ago. Cool.
Word. Yeah, it's a good car rig. I mean, it's very functional.
Mm.
It's because of the language barrier, it's tricky to navigate through. But with a little bit of persistence, you can make it work. Okay, so I'm into the Gundam file. So we will pull the screen share back up.
Okay.
Cool. Took me a while because there are 12 scene files in that folder. I need to do some sort of organization to that. Okay. So this is the main scene file. This is the kind of the hero, the chase scene that has
Mm-hmm.
the most thrusty thrusters. So I think this will be the most appropriate one to jump into. So I will jump out of my chase cam and we will solo. Oh, that's right. So I did this build back in 2.5.65, which was the first build that they introduced the volumetric noise, like
Oh
the
yeah.
that you could introduce, like noise shaders into the volume, like the scattering.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we have the viewport soloing mode, this might react differently than I'm anticipating on how we show it. Um, okay, so this whole dude's rigged, although that's not drastically important. You can see the skeleton there. Turn off polygons. We can see all of these jets are all instanced
Cool.
because I got like a stock model of like what do you call it?
Like a booster
The
system.
Yeah, it's like the engine off like the Saturn V, which is the rocket that NASA used to get to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got all these like turbo pumps and all this sweet ass like piping and stuff. But the thruster bell is really what I wanted. The cone on the end of the thruster. So that's where all the magic's coming from, inside of there. So if we turn back on polygons, turn off the joints, we'll see there's this cone shape, and this is our flame piece of geometry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that is actually acting as a mesh light. So each one of these thrusters, there are 31 in total on this Gundam. Each thruster is comprised of 3 lights.
Okay.
There's the main light, which is a spotlight, if I recall. And then there is the large flame light, which is a mesh, pointing back to that piece of geometry that I kind of just hid. And each one of these has kind of been sculpted. I say sculpted loosely. They're basically just like the shape of a candle flame, but
Yeah.
each one's a little bit different, throughout the different thrusters. Some are fatter, some are longer. And then there's one last cone that is set to a mesh light, and that is an interior sort of light. If I just solo that, this is just like a very plain primitive, and this just um, purpose of that was if you were to catch a view directly down the barrel
Mm-hmm.
of one of these thrusters, you would see like the gap in the middle essentially.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of like acting as a little fill light. So
Cool.
if I jump into my Redshift layout now, we will pray that this doesn't crash, and we'll show off each one of these effects. So to be clear, all of these uh, different lights, mesh lights, etc., they all have different levels of volume contribution on.
Cool.
So this one light has a certain volume contribution. This other, the large cone, which is kind of the hero cone. We're going to turn that to fit window. Give ourselves a region render. Um, so we'll see that, yeah, the volume contribution for one cone and the kind of the main 2 cones are very high in comparison to the lower one.
Mm-hmm.
And also what I'm doing was kind of a trick, is actually using non-physically real decay.
Yeah.
We see that one of these is on linear, whereas the other ones actually, they're all on linear. Oh, look at that. So let's kind of solo these one at a time. So we'll look at the main light, and we'll examine what that is doing on just this one cone here. So of course, because it's a mesh light, we're gonna have to turn off the source meshes as well, so that we can see just the main cone on its own.
Yeah, Andreas, Billy did go over the car rig already, but you should be able to scroll back if you want to check it out.
Oh yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching it on YouTube, you should be able to rewind the time slider a little bit,
Yeah.
or you can catch the video posted afterwards once the stream wraps.
Yeah,
But it was
it's
it was
usually up in like 15 minutes or so after it wraps.
yeah, it was the first thing we really covered. So apologies on that. But yeah, this first cone, we're gonna see that it's not really doing a whole lot. It's just kind of filling in the inside of the thruster, and I didn't want to do this in post because I'm one of those people, as we kind of mentioned earlier in the stream, I don't like compositing a ton.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to figure out a way to do this all in render. So that first cone's not doing a whole lot. Um, it's just like a little bit of a fill kind of inside of some of the thrusters.
Mm-hmm.
And again, each of these different size thrusters, they kind of have varying levels of brightness between the 3 lights. So maybe this particular one wasn't the greatest one to show, but if we turn on that mesh light, we'll see that this large beam will come back on, and this is again kind of the hero. This is the one that's doing most of the heavy lifting. But we'll see that as this sampling starts to resolve a little bit, it looks hollow,
Yeah.
which is sort of weird. I had initially tried doing this um, all with one mesh light, and I was trying to use um, what was I trying to use? I think I was trying to use Fresnel,
Okay.
Fresnel plus some kind of layering of noise to make it look candle-like,
Mm-hmm.
but have it be able to fall off sort of, the way that a Fresnel fall off would behave. But the problem I think that I was running into was that if you viewed it, kind of down the barrel, so to speak, from one of the jets, that it didn't look like it had any like real like oomph to it.
Yeah.
So I developed this kind of, I don't, system, whatever, um, of this series of lights and mesh lights to really give this kind of the fill in that I felt that it needed.
Mm-hmm.
So if we turn on this last cone, we'll see that that is really giving us the kind of the core flame. I did a decent amount of just kind of googling of what like airplane like afterburners and stuff looked like,
Yeah.
and they always or they typically have a fairly healthy kind of center cone. Now it makes no sense that this is an outer space flying robot that's not even real. It doesn't need an afterburner because those operate in atmosphere.
Right.
So I had some artistic liberty to to develop this kind of to a fairly high level of detail. At least I think, or I like to think in my head. Um, so yeah, I kind of just layered these three up, and with enough fussing around. And again, it helps that these are all instanced.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if I wanted to, uh, go through and change this, it wouldn't be too difficult to, say change these all to a different color or, vastly alter the size, the profile of like these cones or whatever.
Now,
Um,
I noticed too that like normally when I add a light into a scene with volumetrics, it affects the whole scene. Now, is it not happening because you have it set to linear decay? Like,
I believe so. I
okay,
think that's actually the trick. So let's jump back to this kind of the side profile so that we can. This was the this was the jet that I kind of did my R&D based off of, because
yeah,
at least with the way that this mech is positioned in the scene, it allowed me to catch like one kind of on its own.
mm,
So let's take a look at that. So catching it directly off the side, we see that this light here, we're gonna lose. Nope. Okay, that was the center one. Okay. Um, so let's find this main cone light, and we see that the fall off stop is at 25. The
yeah,
default value is 100. So if we jump that up to 100, we'll see that. Well, I don't remember. We'll see
oh
what
yeah,
happens. Yeah, so
okay,
it gets super fat, and it's basically losing any relation to the source, piece of geometry. Basically,
right,
um, I think I tuned these in a way that uh, I found the radius in whatever the hell made up units Redshift uses, because this 25 centimeters doesn't correspond to like the width of this thruster bell.
right,
This thruster's like 140 units big. Like if you were to, kind of measure it or whatever.
mm-hmm.
Um, I just kind of toyed with it until, if you look at the kind of the slope that is following, it pretty much covers the size of the opening on the thruster bell.
Yeah,
And there's pretty much two sizes of thrusters on this mech. There's this big fat guy, and then there's the smaller size one, which is sort of one of these up here.
yep,
So I'm really only working with two sets of values, either the big one or the little one.
mm-hmm.
So we'll see, stuff like the intensity multiplier and the volume contribution. It's really only two data sets that I'm needing to balance. So it was relatively manageable to get these all in place. Um, yeah, I mean, do you have any other questions, or is there anything else popped up in the chat?
I haven't seen anything pop up in the chat. Let's see. I'll scroll through again.
Oh, and then the last breakthrough on this was, I think in the volumetric noise, let me see. I had a relatively, at least in my experience, a relatively high scattering value. Usually this scattering value, I think, is at either 0.1 or 0.01.
Yeah.
And you see that this is at 0.3. Let's
Yeah.
call it 0.3. So that's like, in comparison to every other scene that I've done with the volumetric fog, that's like huge. And so if we find my sky, my sunlight, so that infinite light, does that have volumetric contribution? One of these does. Oh boy, this is an old file. I'm exposing myself. Where's the... I think it's this. So for a infinite light,
Okay.
I think for an infinite light, if I recall correctly, I might not be, this power of 2 is relatively low.
Yep.
For a sunlight, but its volume contribution is at 0. So which one? Okay, it's the portal light. So whatever the way the portal light is working, basically I have really high, or I have a volume that is very prone to scattering light, for lack of a better term, because throughout this scene, if we kind of pull up a view that's aiming us towards the sun, which I know is kind of out in the direction over here, I wanted really strong volumetric rays that were being cast by this debris. But I needed to balance that with the strength of the cones. As you can imagine, balancing those two in one scene file so that they're both kind of equally visible was pretty tricky. So we've got, I think it's a portal light. Yeah, so we've got an infinite light that's way far out there in the distance, and then this portal light is giving us a certain amount of scattering. Scattering that is, it has like a cone to it. We can see some of these rays are going up here, some of them are coming down in this direction. They're not all uniform, like an infinite light would cast. So I think that's about it. It would be silly to talk about the volume settings for the lights without addressing the volume itself.
So if I'm understanding this right, you have an infinite light, and then you're using the portal light to control how, like, the intensity of that infinite light. That's
right,
awesome.
because the infinite light, all the rays are parallel.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, because that's just how an infinite light works, right? All
Right.
the light, it's coming as if it's from an infinitely far away light source.
Yeah.
So the rays don't diverge. But a portal light will diverge. The rays of light will spread out, the way that I wanted them to. Because if we look at this as a side profile, we'll see, maybe, hopefully, if I can catch the right angle. It can be kind of tricky.
What's up, Scott? Scott just joined the chat.
Oh, hey dude. I don't want to poking around in here too much, but anyway, because this came before the area lights had the barn door effect, I used a portal light. This is showing it off well. This angle here, how we've got some lights are going up, some lights are going down. The portal light re-enables you to be able to do that with the infinite light.
Cool. Now, I'm noticing too in your render view, are you using like a bokeh or anything? Because I see like color separation happening, like some blue and red.
So there is a dome of the Milky Way, and this has a no, it doesn't have volume contribution. It's just like whatever this Milky Way.jpg.
Yeah.
You locate this. It's just pulling like whatever random color values, like
cool.
The height through here. Oh boy, yeah. I just upset. Don't die on me, Redshift. that JPEG literally disappeared as soon as I opened it.
Oh, really? It
Um,
showed up on here when I was
well,
looking.
it showed up, but then it went away, so I'm not going
Oh.
to push it. Um, yeah, so you're seeing a little bit of that color is coming through. That's a good question. Why it is, why it's interacting with the volume as much as it is. I
Yeah,
know if I
I
turn the camera around to a different angle, we'll get different colors.
yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah, so like over here, there's way more red and golds,
Mm,
and then the purple's at the bottom. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, man. I wrapped, it's just like a dome
yeah,
of the Milky Way, and it's rotated 90 degrees in one direction, so it might be sideways for all I know.
yeah. You just got
Have
like
to,
this perfect happy accident a little
yeah,
bit. Yeah.
yeah, and that stuff happens, when I mentioned this kind of on the Brograph podcast that I was on recently. Was like this last few months I've kind of been experimenting with, I'm in cinema every day, but I'm trying to do like a weekly.
Hmm.
This was more like a 3 or 4 week weekly.
Yeah.
Um, but these sort of happy accidents and dialing in like that specific of a system, for example, for the jet flame cones, that stuff just takes time, and you're able to craft stuff, you know, with a lot more detail and a lot more care, when you're willing to spend a week on a shot, which in this case I did. This was the first shot that I really put together that had all of the volumetrics and all the light rays and the jet cones of flame and fire and all that fun stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and this being the hero shot of this piece that I did, I feel like it came out pretty good. Um, there's all this awesome detail inside of the mech, and all those different thrusters. Um, in post, I layered over some kind of lens flary effects, and it all worked out really good. You gotta give the love and attention to a shot sometimes, as opposed to doing like 7 dailies. I did one weekly.
Yeah.
That's basically the long story short for this shot.
Yeah. Plus, it's I noticed it too, especially like when wanting to learn something, that throwing garbage geometry at something like for 2 hours in a day, you only get so much out of it. So yeah, I think weeklies are kind of the way to go.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and not to disparage the hashtag everyday's movement. I
Mm,
started there with GPU rendering, like 3 years and change ago.
yeah.
I did 100 days of Octane, and it's super awesome. But I think eventually, and this might happen sooner with some artists depending on experience and like how much you're pushing it. I think eventually everyone will hit a wall though,
Hmm.
where you either like need to rapidly or drastically change the topic. Like if you look at Beeple's dailies from 3 years ago, it had like all these greebly, like modelly stuff. And he spent time like building up that library, and then like now they're sort of like more narrative.
Yeah.
We've got the whole Beeple's people storyline that Matt and Dave are coming up with, but like I think that's an example. Even Beeple is evolving. His style, his goal with the dailies.
Yep.
He's still doing them as everydays, but he's finding a way to keep it fresh for him, and for me, um, that was doing like weeklies.
Yeah. Yeah, for like I tried every days a few different times, and when I've gone back and looked at them, I'm like, man, like I've definitely learned during that process. Um, but I've always had to do a theme, otherwise I just can't do it. It's like it's way too much stress. Like I did like a black and white theme one time where I just didn't really worry about materials. It's more just getting lighting and composition set up. Um, I think going into it that way for anybody, it helps a lot. But like you were just saying, that you definitely kind of plateau a little bit too, because
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
just not enough time in a day.
yeah, no, totally. You get so much more out of putting more time and effort into something. So
Yeah.
for this shot, just for fun, I'm gonna show the various levels of play blasts
Mm,
that I did, and mind you, I spent literally a whole week on this. I had the week off. All I was doing was the School of Motion like TAing. I wasn't booked on anything, so if I wasn't critiquing or helping a student with that course, I was working on this. No,
Hmm.
actually,
I
this
think
was this
I
was
think it was
before
before that.
NAB. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I literally just had the week off. So this was like version one. I've got the spline kind of laid out, and I've set up this debris field. Just kind of like using X particles and Vitaly Bulgarov's like kit bash
Yeah.
pack to make it look like a debris field. So that was like, even though this is called version 4, that was basically what I would call V1 of that
Hmm.
animation. Um, so I worked on this from Monday to Saturday. This is adding in a little bit more kind of like twisting and some extra, kind of like tweaks to it. Again, I haven't got into joint animation, like the individual arms and legs and stuff. I'm still kind of working my way through this scene, and you can
Yeah.
see it's like kind of slow. There's not a whole lot to it. Just as a play blast, a viewport kind of preview. It doesn't need to be super crazy. So that one wants to open in QuickTime. Cool. So this one still kind of the same thing. Haven't seen a ton of development on it. Um, Eventually, we'll get into one of these that has like limb. Yeah. So this one is where I've done a pass as far as animating the limbs.
Yeah.
And kind of like each one of these passes is like a half a day or a day's worth of effort.
Hmm.
Just like really tweaking the motion path, tweaking the positioning of the camera, because the camera's kind of following along, as well. It's aiming and then also moving. It's doing its whole thing. So I think we're veering out of just Redshift now, but at that previous stage, I was like, okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I rendered off a version of the render, so that I could see in Redshift, like, am I catching highlights? Am I catching, am I in shadow? What's going on? I think I turned the volumetrics off. Um, like the main like this quote unquote atmosphere
Yeah.
volumetric, so it was a little bit quicker. This is like a really low sample render, but you're starting to develop that process. This is kind of like, if this was a client piece, this would be the file that I would send off to get sign off, like to then submit this to the farm or to let it render, in this case for like 6 days or whatever
Hmm.
it took me to render this on just my one machine. This would be the stage right before getting sign off. You would supply this and then like one finished polished frame, and then you
Yeah.
would just like say, hey client, can you please put these together in your imagination, please?
Right.
And then hopefully you get sign off. So yeah, I mean, even though this is a daily, I'm still kind of approaching it the way that I would approach like real work.
Right. Right.
um because I don't like separating those two ideas.
Yeah. But
um
they definitely kind of all merge together. At least for me too. Like in my folders set up, I have just like a production drive, and everything lives on there. So it doesn't really matter if I'm working on personal stuff or client stuff. It's all production. Like I'm to me, it's all the same. Like I'm all about that too. So um, I guess too, like process wise, do you think, like having worked in Octane and now in this, do you think it would have been any easier being in Octane for getting the look that you wanted? Like you said, you had to do look dev a good bit for like the propulsion stuff, or do you find now that you've been in Redshift so long that it kind of just came together the
I
same
mean,
way?
yeah, I think at this point switching back to Octane, it would be slower for me because I
Yeah.
would, I'd have to shake the cobwebs off on
Right.
Octane. But like that's not a knock against Octane. It's like
Right.
if I was an Arnold user and I switched to using V-Ray, it would be the same story.
Oh
I'd
yeah.
of not touching a render engine for a year, if it's gone through updates and whatever, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this node's different, what do I do? Um, but so kind of that, with that out of the equation and just going off of my memory of what I had in um, Octane, I think I think that this shot or this animation, whatever you want to call it, probably could have been done in Octane. This was relatively light in terms of VRAM.
Yeah.
I think if I was watching the Redshift feedback display, I think the heaviest that this shot got, um, I'm going to turn off screen share. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, just so that we can chat. I think the heaviest that this project got was about 2 gigs of VRAM on a shot, and I've got 6 gig cards, 980 Ti. So I mean, there would have been nothing stopping me,
Yeah.
I suppose. But I'm personally, I'm kind of like all in on Redshift. Um, at least around the house, I now have 2 licenses. In the midst of me doing this animation, I is actually when I built my second computer, and I bought a second um, license for Redshift to render out the like third, fourth, and fifth shots
Right.
on this. So, you know, all the car stuff I do for fun, all of like the shoe stuff, you name it. If I've made it in the last year, it's been done in Redshift. And I think, in the last like 2 years, I've grown so much as an artist that even like to going 1 year ago, my ability to build shaders and stuff is, on a higher level now than it was 12 months ago.
Right.
So if I was to jump back to where I was most recently in Octane, 13, 14 months ago, I would want to redo that stuff anyway.
Oh yeah.
Like if I had like the Billy concrete pre, I wouldn't be happy with it
Yeah.
today. So for me, there's not a whole heck of a lot of a reason to jump back to Octane until the 4.0 builds become more stable or more production ready.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give a shot at evaluating those. The main reason I switched in the first place was the car stuff that I like to do for fun. I was hitting my VRAM limit,
Yeah.
um, and once that limit is removed with Octane 4.0 having out of core geometry, I'm gonna give it another shot and spend a few weeks in it or whatever and kind of getting up to speed with rebuilding some shaders at the quality level that I'm happy with now. But for just like a week long thing or however long I spent on this, um, I'm not going to be jumping back and forth
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, and when I say like I was developing the cones for the jet propulsion stuff on this, you know, I did that like kind of on and off like over the course of a night.
Right.
I probably wasted half the time in Slack or watching a YouTube video or something. So
Right.
to say like, oh, it took me a whole night to develop that in Redshift, I could have done it in a quarter of the time of Octane. Like, even that's not a fair comparison because I wasn't just like, again, I had the week off for fun.
Right.
I wasn't like sitting here like dialed in, like until the last day because the last day was the day before I went to NAB.
Yeah.
At that point, I was locked in.
Yeah.
But the handful of days leading up to that, they were just kind of chill.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I feel the same way. Like, because I've looked at stuff that I made in Redshift, 12 months ago, and it's like, what was I doing? And now I think it still would apply going into Octane too. Like if I opened up old projects, I'd probably be like, why was I doing it this way? Yeah, I was kind of just asking in terms of like people making the argument of look devs faster in this or that, and maybe it would have sped up your process a little bit more to try it in different engines. But
I
yeah,
mean, it might have, but I look at a project because I'm doing more animations now.
yeah,
I try to do an animation a week.
right,
I'm kind of a week off of that streak now,
yeah,
because I missed the previous week, but I my creative process encompasses everything from start, like coming up like with an idea all the way through posting it, like when I post it, whatever. So everything in between, that equation is something that I'm considering. So
yeah,
look dev might have been faster in Octane if I was, equally up to speed with it as I am in Redshift.
yeah,
But final rendering in this case, I was rendering on 2 machines for like 2 weeks and change, like
Yeah.
around the clock on both computers, I wouldn't have got the look, like the amount of grain, well, in this case, the not amount of grain,
Right.
I wouldn't have got there in Octane
Yeah.
because like volumetric noise in this case, like or volumetric scattering takes so long to sample out the noise in Octane that I would have been rendering for 4 weeks
Yeah.
instead of 2 weeks.
Right.
So if I am, let's just be overly generous and say if it takes me 3 days longer to nail my look dev, if it's going to save me a week or 2 weeks of render time, then I've still come out ahead.
Right. Yeah.
And
Totally.
I like the look. I mean, I'm happy with the look of
Oh yeah.
Redshift. So for me, it's it not having in this current state, not having stuff like post effects bloom
Mm.
or whatever. Sure, that could have been handy, but I made that stuff up in post.
Yeah. Right.
I rendered out just like standard render, um, like object buffers of like the cone,
Mm.
you know, and then I used those masks as like blurs and stuff in After Effects, and I made up for the fact that Redshift didn't, for Redshift not having post effects blur.
Yeah.
I got my faster render time because it's biased, and if you
Mm.
know your way around the unified sampling system, you can optimize it further.
Yep.
And then I made up the post in post instead of baking it into render.
Oh yeah.
So for me, Redshift is the right tool.
Yeah.
I recognize and I respect that that's not the opinion of everybody, but that's why we have different render engines because different artists have different thoughts.
Oh yeah. Totally. Totally. And like I mean,
No, I know you agree, but I'm just
yeah.
I'm articulating this point, a little bit more kind of in depth for if there's anyone listening still at this point.
Well, you'll be surprised. Like even if we don't get a lot of viewers tonight, I've noticed that there's a lot of people that go back and watch the next day because most of these get anywhere from like 500 to 1,000 views. So it's
Awesome.
yeah. So you'll be heard. Um, yeah, I was gonna say too. Like, I've been messing around with Octane 4 just because it's now up to like beta 3 or whatever.
Okay.
And I'm just not fast at it anymore. like what you were
Yeah.
saying. Like I go in there like, man, I like this is kind of nice and it kind of feels a little bit more familiar now that they have like a nice unified Uber shader and things like that. But when it comes to just like doing client work now, I'm always in Redshift. That like you were saying, if I'm gonna lose a couple days on look dev, that's fine because I know I can make up that time shooting it off to Pixelplow or wherever and like I did a 14K render, like 14K by 4K render for this giant projection thing, and I sent it off, and I got it back in like a day and a half from Pixelplow, and there's no way I'd be able to do that with Octane. So yeah, like you said, there's definitely the tool for the job, and I just it's a fun conversation to have to see like where people stand with all that.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
It's always a fun conversation. It's like Xbox versus PlayStation.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's work, so you kind of have to look at it a little bit differently than just leisure.
Right.
It's always fun to have those heated discussions.
Right. Cool. Well, I guess what time? Man, we're at 10:05 already. So I know you've been on here before, but go ahead and plug your stuff too if you want to plug your Instagram and where people can find you.
Yeah. So my name is Billy Chitkin. I go by Gurnge on most social media stuff. So if you like any of the artwork you saw on stream, if you want to see more of it, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Gurnge. Additionally, you can look up my website, which is just gurnge.com. That has some more stuff. Some projects have breakdowns. And then lastly, my Vimeo, which is just my name, which is Billy Chitkin. That'll be in the title of the post. So yeah, I think that'll cover my plugs.
Cool. And yeah, if you guys don't know Billy from the previous stream, go check out the previous stream. And he was just on the Brograph podcast 2 weeks ago, so 2 episodes ago. And I think that was you were on there for like 2.5 hours, right? That was a long one. You guys got pretty in depth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a fun one. We talked about freelancing, and a whole bunch of stuff. So there's, if you weren't bored by me talking at this point, then there are at least 3 more hours on the internet of me talking. So you can check that out at brograph.com. I'm assuming slash podcast, but you can navigate to it from there.
Yeah, I
I
think
trust you as a citizen on the internet, a diligent listener, that you can find that yourself.
yeah.
I trust you.
Chase in the chat saying don't hesitate from just shooting the shit because it means he doesn't have to pay attention to work, so, or pay attention to us, and he can just work with us in the background. Well, thank you, Chase. Um, cool, man. So, what do you have anything cool cooking that people should be looking out like on your Instagram or?
Yeah, I've got one little. Let me just open it. I'm just gonna open the viewport, and we'll see how that goes.
Sound like Chad, where like at the end of a stream, he's just like, "Well, let me just show you this one thing."
Is that? Oh, again, that's a daily, because I'm an idiot. I start a daily, and then it's not a daily.
Yeah.
It turns into a weekly or a monthly, and then I have to go find it. So this project file is from June 26th. So we'll jump back on the screen share one last time. I know David Ariev plugged one of these packs from Kit Bash.
Oh yeah, and he's supposed to be doing another live stream with him again, I think too.
Yeah, so this is the Future Slums
Cool.
Kit Bash pack. So it's like old ruined, destroyed buildings, kind of very Hong Kong style.
Yeah.
If we zoom in here, we can see there's like drapes and air conditioners and signage and all this fun stuff hanging out on every one of these buildings.
Cool.
So I'm cooking up a little something with this. So
Nice.
that'll be coming to a social media post near you.
Nice.
I think that'll about do it.
Cool. Well, Billy, as always, thanks for hanging out, man. It's cool just to break down your work. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It's fun as always.
So, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, I was not really well prepared. So I'm just going to leave Billy up here full screen and close out here since my webcam's not even hooked up to OBS at the moment. So we've now switched to every other week for Redshift Live. So next week it will probably be something with Dave and Matt if they decide to do something. I know that they're wrapping up a project, so they may just be sleeping a lot and trying to catch up there. And then the following week we'll have Redshift Live, I believe. Actually, before I confirm that, let me just see. So next week is off. The following week I might be off because I'm supposed to be on vacation that week. So I might just have to wing it from my laptop, but we'll see.
Or I could do modeling.
Yeah, Billy, if you want to pick up a stream, that's totally cool. So
For sure.
it's super easy. Matt and Dave can walk you through logging in. It's really easy. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments below. You can find me on 531 pretty much everywhere. Just do a quick Google for 531, spelled out FIVE, numeral 31. And you can shoot me emails. You can hang out in any of the numerous motion design Slacks, Brograph, MDA, wherever else
GSG.
I'm hanging out. Yeah, GSG. Yeah. So you can hit me up in there. We can chat it up too. So I appreciate talking with you guys too because it allows me to create new tutorials. And I know I've kind of been slowing down on that, but it's kind of just on a whatever you guys suggest basis at this point. So if you guys are looking for something, let me know. All right, guys, that's it for this week. I'll talk to you soon. Billy, thanks again for hanging out, and enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, have a nice night, everyone.
All right, man, take it easy.
Peace.